Hi all, I have another inspiring, exciting game to show you. This is from TCEC Season 17, Premier Division, Round 34. Leela was playing the reverse match against Scorpio Neural Network, ScorpioNN. So if you remember one of our previous videos, the first 8 moves, but this is with Leela playing white now, where this King's Indian defense here, so fianchetto variation, c6, white castles, knight bd7, b3, e5. This is the end of the book given. Leela chooses e4. It's, I believe, important to play e4 here. So this is the first move out of book, e4, to stop black from playing e4. So say bishop b2, e4 from black, and d5. This seems, it should be about even, this position. You might also consider, hold on a sec, what about another plan, d takes. This has a little bit of venom with bishop a3, but maybe black should be fine after a strategic bishop exchange. Quite often in the King's Indian, exchanging off these bishops weakens d4, and if, for example, the knight could hop in, to e6 later, then that's going to be fun, looking at d4 and stuff. Okay, so that's to be aware of. So I don't think that line is particularly dangerous. So e4 is the critical move. We have rook e8, h3. So again, keeping the tension in the center, encouraging black to take, and get some temporary pressure on the e4 pawn. So e takes was actually played. Knight c5. So looking at e4, rook e1. We have a5. So a classic starting position. This has been seen in many over-the-board high-level games. We have bishop f4, and a4 is played here, b4, knight e6, knight takes e6, so this is actually a swap, in effect, now, of the d6 pawn for the c4 pawn. White plays bishop takes d6. So it's difficult to defend c4 here. It's rather awkward. So just taking off d6 is the logical thing. And we have knight d7 first, hitting the knight before taking on c4, hitting the knight here, e5. Now bishop takes c4. So this position has been seen in several very high-level games. In this particular game, we see Leela playing rook e4. The move f4 has been tried before. This is in the game Marcour, I believe, against Howell in the Isle of Lewis tournament 1995. And actually, I believe David Howell with the black pieces, he won quite quickly. This was actually the game. I can just quickly show you it. Black actually had got a winning position rather quickly after winning the exchange. That was it. Pretty short game there. So that was with the move f4. It does seem as though maybe f6 is going to be interesting for black. So rook e4 here, hitting the bishop. So a tempo gaining move. Bishop e6. And now queen e2. In this position, an alternative has been seen in Dvoris against Petrosian. So that was in the Bernal tournament of 1984 with b5. So instead of queen e2, b5 was seen in that game, and that actually ended. That was an interesting game, and it ended as a win later. No, this ended as a draw here. In this actual position, it ended as a draw here. Pardon me. But yeah, so there's high-level games around this position, but queen e2 was chosen. So this does seem to discourage f6 in particular, putting more pressure on that e file. We have knight b6, rook d1, now knight d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5. If c takes d5, you might ask. Rook e d4, yeah, that pawn's a bit of a problem. On queen d7, g4, that d5 is a bit of a liability. So that shields h3, yeah, that d5 looks weak. White's better there. So bishop takes d5 was played. Rook e3, bishop e6, a3, getting this pawn out of the target of the bishop. We have queen b6, queen b2 now, bishop b3, rook d4. This is very, very interesting stuff. What's going on here, you might ask? f6 is played now. We have bishop c5, queen c7. Very, very interesting, this whole approach from white. Why has f6 been allowed in these circumstances? It seems as though, isn't this a bit ridiculous? Because e6, for example, f5, look at that skewer on that diagonal, potentially. So the point is revealed here, actually. Guess what Leela plays in this position, which is a really, really interesting move now. Okay, 5 seconds to pause the video for 200 points. What would you play with white? Okay, the reason to be cheerful, I believe, is fundamentally that the f6 move has weakened this second rank. King safety could become a major issue. We have queen d2 emphasizing, rook d7 is a powerful rook on the 7th style move. Now here, f takes e5 was played. It looks as though if rook takes, bishop d6 is dissuading that. F takes e5 as an example. F takes e5 though. We have this rook on the 7th, rook d7. Now the queen actually did move, queen c8. White is in the position, if there's a pin, white is in the position to reinforce with rook ed3 if needed. So we have the queen actually just moving. Just to put that on the board, so you know what I'm talking about there. If rook ed8, I mean, also taking on b7 is lucrative anyway, but white also does have the option, it seems, of rook ed3. Actually, there exists a knockout tactical blow in this position. So for a bonus 200 points, what would you play here? There's a crushing tactic for white. So it looks as though the rook's pinned to the queen. You can actually do better than rook takes c7 or rook ed3 here with, okay, bishop d5 check. It's an interruption move, interrupting that link between d8 and d2. And so say after bishop takes d5, rook takes c7. It's much safer. You don't lose the queen here. Massive advantage for white. So anyway, queen c8 was deemed the best, and we have bishop e6, and there's a lock and key on this d file, which is interesting. So this pawn sacrifice here, interesting as well. So white a pawn down, but this access on the 7th rank, slightly compromised king safety. 2 pawns around the king. This loosens pawn chain. Okay, so what happens here? But also, isn't there a tactic here in this particular position as well? That white's locked down the d file, but has Leela missed a simple tactic? Bishop h6, skewering queen and rook. What's the idea here? Well, before we get into that, by the way, if h6, then rook ed3, this position, can be very nasty. This kind of pressure on the king side could culminate in something spectacular here. Just for the record, what would you play in this position? If I give you 5 seconds here, this is a variation. Okay, with this pressure, with the rooks in the center, they actually have quite a major influence, more than you might anticipate, on the king side. In fact, this lesson about the center and its influence on the king was featured in a game in Nimzovich's My System, his loss against Rubinstein, where he sort of talked about that if you lose control of the center file, horrible things could happen to your king. And here, rook takes g6, queen d3 check. This is a disaster for black. Black's just going to get checkmated. So these variations are pretty scary if a move like h6. So bishop h6, it does seem to volunteer. Isn't this another defender around the king? It volunteers potentially an important defender. White has a resource here, which is quite impressive. f4 is played. It's impressive for what it actually implies here, rather subtly. Black played bishop c4. You might wonder what on earth is going on. The thing is, if e takes f4, there's quite a wonderful move in this position. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video for 500 points, what would you play here? So e takes f4, you might have been tempted to play if you were playing black. White plays, and this is pretty instructive actually, because this rook on the 7th, you know, it feels dangerous, but is it? White's bishops, they feel dangerous, the centre's wide open, the 4 central squares, but there's a beautiful move which really targets the black king basically here. Okay, I'm going to tell you. Rook takes b3, it knocks out the light square defender, so that makes it ripe for bishop d5 check. C takes, queen takes d5 check, bishop d4, bishop takes g7 is mating. Beautiful stuff. Rook takes b3. What a shot that is indeed. So to replay this, action replay, rook takes b3. Here, if rook e1 check, queen takes, there's rook f3. White is a bishop up here. This is a big advantage for white. So yeah, interesting, this f4. So not only unpinning the rook, but the rook is ready to weaken those light squares there. We have bishop c4. So, and here, another 500-point question. White to play here. Fascinating stuff. What would you play here? Okay, get ready for this. Rook ed3. Again, offering an exchange set basically, but also preparing the threat. Rook d8. That looks nasty, among other things. Rook f8 is played. Here, if bishop takes d3, queen takes d3. This, if we look at this, bishop g7, f takes, is a very big position for white. White here has things like rook takes g7, check, e6, and the bishops actually dominate the black rooks. If you look at this, the queen side's falling apart, and it persists even into the endgame territory. The white king can stroll up here and just help ease the b6 pawn to crown there to a queen later. So that's a huge advantage if we look at that. That bishop takes d3, queen takes is remarkable. So yeah, I gave bishop g7 as an example here. If, for example, well, rook a6, token move, check, queen f7 is crushing. It's going to be crushing, yeah, that's just absolutely crushing as an example. So it seems far too dangerous. Have a look at this again, believe it or not. This is just far too dangerous because of, you know, queen c4, queen f7. It's too much, the threats. So let's go back. So after rook ed3, this was ignored with rook f8. And now we have this pressure situation, rook d to d6. Huge pressure on the king side. E takes f4, and this is rather suave aesthetically, this next move, but also a tempo gainer. Queen d4, gaining a tempo, hitting the bishop. We have bishop f7. If bishop a2, white can take control of this diagonal. Can you see how? An instructive move in this variation. If I give you 5 seconds, what would you play in this position? If bishop a2 had been played. Okay, you've got huge pressure on the king side here. Bishop f1, trying to get that lethal check in on the diagonal. And here, rook d8 would be winning the queen. As an overload of the black position, that's winning for white. So queen d4, we have bishop f7. Now, magnificence continues on the board. Guess what white plays here? Okay, rook takes f7. Yeah, this compels black to take with the rook. Taking with the king seems rather rather suspect indeed. There's an idea of bishop f1 to c4, for example, if the king took. It looks outrageous to do that. So rook takes f7, among other things. There's rook d8 check now, winning the queen. So this is looking very favourable for white. Bishop g7, queen d6, holding that bishop for a moment, fg. The bishop does come to this lethal diagonal. King h8. Now bishop d3, actually. Rook f8, bishop b6, holding control of the d file for a moment. Also, bishop d4 is interesting as well. Rook a8, h4, check, king g2, rook f8. In fact here, bishop c5 is played. We have rook d1. Queen d7, rook g8, and now h5, not minding that the king's sitting on this g file, not too scared. Rook d2 check, rook d2 check is played. If g takes, it's no big problem actually. Queen f5 check, white can actually afford a double check here. The king just goes to f3 in this line, and it's crushing for the black king really. It's going to be crushing for the black king shortly after. So rook d2 check was played, not g takes, trying to expose that king. King takes, bishop f6. We have bishop e3. At this point, hg seems strong as well. It would open up the h file. So for example, like this, there's always queen h3 check, bishop c4 check, winning for white. So bishop e3, it's a very strong position. Rook d1. h6, installing the dreaded form pawn, has been installed as well. What more does white want? Rook d8. We have queen e6. So the form pawn means, you know, if rook takes d3, then actually queen e8 is checkmate. The form pawn controls g7. That's an immediate checkmate. So we have bishop a1, bishop c4, rook 1 to d6. Here, the threat is essentially to checkmate the black king with bishop f4 to e5. So for example, if b5, bishop f4, if taking bishop e5 check, and here the form pawn wins because it supports g7 as well. So rook 1 to d6, queen f7, rook 6 to d7, queen f1, hitting the bishop, rook d1 protecting the bishop, queen f7, rook 1 to d7, queen e6, rook d6, queen e4, b5. Now we see here bishop f4, this mechanic, bishop f4, for going in for bishop e5. We have b takes, c4. So here we have actually bishop takes d6. Yeah, stronger than bishop e5. That could be ignored with king g8. So bishop takes d6. Bishop f6 is played because if rook takes d6, then the back row, queen e8, is checkmate. So it's all over. Bond shouting. Queen. So after bishop takes d6, bishop f6, queen e6, bishop d4, bishop e5 check, bishop takes, and it actually goes to the checkmate, believe it or not, with queen g7, checkmate. Yeah, philosophically, I'm reminded of Nimezvich's instructive commentary in My System about the center, controlling the center files, because sometimes that can refute an attack. He tried to do this attack against the great Kiba Rubinstein, and it's refuted by the central tactics. Here, it's like the center does have a big bearing on black's king safety throughout. It encourages white to use the exchange sacrifices where necessary to weaken light squares as well. Getting both rooks, you know, attacking over here means that that compromised pawn structure, you know, there's also tactics like rook sacrifices available. So huge pressure throughout on the black king side after that amazing, deep initial pawn sacrifice to get that d file. It's really quite a crisp, instructive game for the importance of the center in a way versus material sometimes. That central bind was very, very impressive in my view. Okay, hope you enjoyed it as much as me. If you would like to invite me indirectly for a game, you can just use kingscrusher.tv, register at Chessworld, and I'll invite you for a game shortly after. Or bit.ly/Chessworld there. There's also Kingscrusher TV/Discord, which is pretty lively recently, discussing TCEC, etc. If you want to join the chat there. And there's playlists there as well if you want to check out bit.ly/Leela Chess or bit.ly/Magnus Carlsen Chess. Okay. Likes, comments, questions, subscribe to the channel, always welcome. Thanks very much.